The day I pinned on my captain's bars, my father didn't come. He said he had a board meeting he couldn't reschedule. I was 28 years old, standing in a gymnasium at Fort Campbell with my husband beside me and an empty chair in the front row where my father was supposed to be. My mother had driven 9 hours from Savannah to be there. My father had a Marriott Rewards conference call. That was 3 years before the wedding. And I should have known then what kind of man he was. But I kept trying. That's the thing nobody tells you about daughters with difficult fathers. We keep trying long after we should have stopped. My name is Vanessa, and this is the story of the worst and best day of my life. My father built his money in commercial real estate, not the kind where you start with nothing and scrape. He inherited seed capital from my grandfather and turned it into something bigger through a combination of timing, ruthlessness, and an ability to make other people feel small enough that they didn't argue with him. By the time I was in high school, he had his name on 2 buildings in downtown Atlanta and a certainty about himself that filled every room he walked into. He had plans for me. I was supposed to study business, come into the company, and eventually be handed something I hadn't built. He never said it exactly like that, but that was the architecture of it. His daughter carrying his name forward. The legacy in a skirt. Instead, I enrolled in ROTC my freshman year at Georgia State. I didn't tell him until Thanksgiving of that year, when the program was already underway, and dropping out would have felt like losing something that was already mine. He laughed. That's the first thing he did. He actually laughed. "You're going to take orders from people who couldn't get into a real school?" he said. He was cutting his turkey, not even looking at me. "Vanessa, come on." My mother set down her fork. She knew that quiet that had come over me. "I like it," I said. "I'm good at it." "You're good at a lot of things," he said. "That doesn't mean you should do all of them professionally." He moved on to talking about a development project in Buckhead. The conversation was over, as far as he was concerned. I sat there and ate my cranberry sauce and decided that the only thing I could do was become so good at what I'd chosen that he would eventually have nothing left to say. 8 years later, I was a captain with 2 deployments, a combat action badge from Kandahar, and a commendation for a decision I made in a firefight that saved 4 lives in my unit. I'd traded sleep for purpose and uncertainty for the particular clarity that comes from knowing exactly who you are when everything is on fire. I had also met Derek. He was a warrant officer when we crossed paths at Fort Bragg. Quiet, precise, the kind of man who listens more than he speaks and says exactly the right thing when he does. He'd done 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, and he had the same stillness that I'd noticed in the best soldiers I'd served with. Not the stillness of someone who had shut down, but the stillness of someone who had decided what mattered and let everything else go. We got engaged on a Tuesday evening in October, sitting on the tailgate of his truck at a park outside Fayetteville. He didn't make a production of it. He just took the ring out of his jacket pocket and said, "I'd like to do this the right way, if you'll have me." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The first call I made was to my mother. She cried. The second call I made was to my father. He asked what Derek did for work. I told him. There was a pause. "Warrant officer," he said, like he was reading it off a list and wasn't sure which category to file it under. "So this is a career military situation." "Yes, Vanessa." Another pause. "You're 31. I assumed you'd come around by now." Come around, as though 8 years of service was a phase I was passing through on the way back to his vision of my life. "I wanted you to know because I love you," I said. "And I'd like you to be happy for me." "I'll think about it," he said. He did come to the engagement dinner 3 months later. He shook Derek's hand and asked him 3 questions about salary and 1 about his 5-year plan. Derek answered all of them without flinching. My mother squeezed my knee under the table. I drank my water and told myself this was fine. The wedding was set for May. We chose a venue outside Savannah, a restored plantation house that my mother had always loved. Big white columns and Spanish moss, and a garden that went gold in the late afternoon. We'd invited 312 people. My father had opinions about the guest list. He had opinions about the caterer. He had opinions about what time the ceremony should start because he had people coming from out of town and he didn't want them sitting in traffic. I let him have the small things because I was trying. What I did not let him have was any say over what I wore. I had decided months earlier that I would wear my dress uniform to the ceremony. Derek would be in his. It wasn't a political statement, it was just who we were. It was the truest version of ourselves, standing up in front of the people we loved. My mother understood immediately. She helped me press the jacket the night before and cried again when she saw me in it. My father, when he found out, said it was unconventional. He said guests would expect a gown. He said it might come across as making a statement when the day was supposed to be about love. I told him the day was about love, and this was how I was expressing it. He went quiet in the way that meant he was storing the argument for later. The morning of the wedding was one of those May days in Georgia where the air is warm and slightly sweet, and the light comes in sideways through the trees. My mother and I had coffee on the porch of the venue while a mockingbird worked through its whole catalog in the magnolia. I was surprisingly calm. Not the calm of someone who had suppressed her feelings, but the calm of someone who had done the work and arrived at something real. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock. At 3:15, my father came to find me in the bridal suite. He knocked twice, didn't wait for an answer, and walked in. My mother was there. My maid of honor, my cousin Priya, was there. My father looked at my uniform, the ribbons, the badges, the captain's bars, and his expression went through several things before it settled on something I recognized from childhood, the expression that meant he had decided something and intended to enforce it. "You're wearing that," he said. "Yes. Vanessa, I'm going to be very direct with you." He put his hands in his pockets the way he did in boardrooms. "I have 300 guests downstairs, people I've done business with for 20 years, people whose opinion matters to me. You are going to walk down that aisle in that," he gestured at me, "uniform, and people are going to talk." "Let them talk," I said. "Take it off." My mother stood up from the chair by the window. "Take it off," he said again. "Wear a gown. Your mother can find you something in an hour. We still have time." "I'm not taking it off." He crossed the room in 4 steps. I genuinely don't think he planned what he did next. I think it was reflex. The reflex of a man who had never in 63 years been told no by someone he considered beneath him. He reached for the ribbon rack on my chest, as if he was going to pull it free himself. I stepped back. He grabbed my arm. What happened after that happened fast. He raised his hand. I didn't move. And then he hit me, open-palmed, across the left side of my face. The room went absolutely still. Priya made a sound. My mother said his name. One word. Low and final. The way you speak to someone who has just crossed a line they can't uncross. My father stood there looking at what he'd done. I think part of him expected me to cry, or to apologize, or to fold the way I might have at 17. Instead, I turned toward the mirror, checked my ribbons, and straightened the one he jostled when he grabbed me. "We're going to be late," I said. I walked out. He followed because there was nothing else to do. The ceremony proceeded. I walked down the aisle on my mother's arm. She had asked me, weeks earlier, if she could do that. Derek was waiting at the altar in his dress blues, and when he saw me, his face did something I still can't fully describe. It was the face of a man who sees exactly the woman he chose. In the front row, to the right, was Derek's family. His parents, his brother, his aunt and uncle. And beside his uncle sat the man who had driven 5 hours from Fort Benning specifically for this wedding, because he had served with Derek's father 30 years ago and would not have missed it for anything. Brigadier General Raymond Ashford. I had met him twice. He was 71 years old, retired, white-haired, and possessed of the particular quiet authority of someone who has spent a lifetime making decisions that cost lives and has made peace with that. He sat in the pew with his hands folded and watched the ceremony with the expression of a man who knows what service costs. My father was on the left side, front row. I could feel him from where I stood. The vows were Derek's and mine. We had written them ourselves. His made me laugh. Mine made Priya cry again. The officiant, a chaplain who had served with both of us on different bases, pronounced us married at 4:47 in the afternoon, with the gold light coming in through the windows and the sound of something that felt like rightness. The reception was in the garden. My father found his footing there. He had a glass of scotch and his business dinner voice, and he worked the room the way he always did, and I think for an hour he convinced himself that the thing in the bridal suite had not happened. I didn't look at him. I danced with my husband. I danced with my mother. I sat at a table with Derek's family and felt for the first time in a long time, completely at home. Then they did the toasts. The best man went first. Then Priya. Then my father stood up. I should have anticipated this. He had been on the guest list, and he had a microphone in his hand, and the scotch had made him certain again. He talked about family legacy. He talked about the responsibility that comes with his name. He talked about choices, not specific ones, he was too careful for that. But in the way that made clear he was gesturing at mine. He said he hoped that Vanessa and her husband would find stability, a word that landed the way he intended it to, because everyone who knew him understood what stability meant coming from him. He said he hoped she would eventually understand that there were many ways to serve. There was polite applause, some confused looks. Derek's hand found mine under the table. Then General Ashford stood up. He hadn't been scheduled to speak. He hadn't asked anyone's permission. He simply rose from his chair, and the quality of his presence, or maybe just the instinct of 300 people recognizing without knowing why, that someone important had stood up, brought the garden to silence. He held his glass and looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the crowd. I want to say something about this woman, he said. He talked about the combat action badge, what you have to do to earn one, what conditions have to exist, what decisions have to be made in how many seconds. He explained it plainly, without drama, the way you explain something to people who don't know the context. He talked about the nature of service, not the abstract version, not the bumper sticker version, but the specific version. The kind that involves choosing to be somewhere dangerous so that other people don't have to be. He said he had known a lot of people who wore the uniform and a lot of people who didn't, and the ones who wore it well were the ones who had decided, before anything else, what they would not compromise. Then he looked at my father. The garden was so quiet I could hear the mockingbird from somewhere in the trees. The decorations your daughter is wearing, he said, are not silly. They are the record of a woman who did what was asked of her, further than it was comfortable, without complaint, without recognition from the people closest to her. He paused. That is the definition of character. He raised his glass. Vanessa and Derek. 300 people stood up. My father did not. I don't know what happened in him in that moment. I watched his face and I couldn't read it. He was a man who had controlled rooms his whole life, and the room had just left him. He sat very still with his scotch glass and stared at the white tablecloth, and for the first time since I was a child, he looked small. My mother, who was sitting 2 seats away from him, did not look at him. She was on her feet with everyone else, and she was crying, and she was clapping, and she was looking at me. After the reception wound down, after the dancing and the cake and the last photographs, after the guests had trickled out and the caterers were clearing the tables, I found an envelope in my bag that I didn't recognize. My name on the front in handwriting I didn't know. Derek and I sat on the back steps of the venue in the dark while I opened it. It was from General Ashford. A note, handwritten, 3 paragraphs. He wrote that he had been at a ceremony just like this one, 40 years ago, when Derek's father got married. He wrote that he had watched Derek grow up from a distance, through letters and phone calls and the things his father said with pride, and that the man at the altar today was everything a father could hope for. He wrote that some legacies are not passed down through money or property or the name on a building. Some legacies are passed down through the decision to keep going when it's hard, to choose integrity over comfort, to show up even when showing up costs you something. He wrote, "Your father may not know it yet, but you've already built more than he has." I read it twice. Derek read it once and then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and held my hand. We sat there for a while, the two of us, in the warm Georgia night. There was music from somewhere inside, a last slow song from the DJ wrapping up. In the distance, through the trees, I could see the lights of the parking lot and the last of the cars heading out. My father had left an hour earlier. He hadn't said goodbye. In the weeks that followed, I heard from my mother that he had called the general's aide to complain. He called it grandstanding. He called it an embarrassment. The aide, she said, had been politely silent, which is the military way of saying there is nothing I can help you with here. My father still calls me on my birthday. The conversations are brief. He does not ask about the army. I do not ask about the company. We have found a kind of truce that looks like nothing from the outside. What I know now, what I have turned over in my mind enough times that it has worn smooth, is that he was never going to give me what I needed. Not because he was incapable of love, but because his love had always come with a price tag, and the price was becoming someone he had already decided I should be. The day I stopped negotiating that price was the day I stopped negotiating that price was the day I started building something real. The uniform is hanging in our closet now. The combat action badge is in a case on the wall. Derek was promoted to chief warrant officer 2 years ago. We have a daughter. She is 2 years old, and she has Derek's eyes and my stubbornness, and she has absolutely no interest in being told what to do. I am not angry at my father anymore. Anger is expensive, and I have better things to spend myself on. But when she is old enough, I will show her that case on the wall. I'll tell her what the badges mean, what they cost, and why we keep them. I'll tell her that the most important thing anyone ever said to me was not said by a man in a boardroom with his name on a building. It was said in a garden in May by an old general who stood up when he didn't have to. And I will tell her that the day someone tries to make you take off what you've earned, whatever form that takes, the answer is no. Always no. That's the only legacy worth passing down. I used to think that if I had just worked hard enough, my father would eventually see me. Not the daughter he designed in his head, but the actual person standing in front of him. It took me a long time to understand that some people are not capable of seeing you clearly. Not because you're invisible, but because seeing you would require them to question themselves. And that is a cost they will never agree to pay. What happened at my wedding was not an accident. It was the end of a long chain of smaller moments. Every Thanksgiving dinner where my career was dismissed. Every phone call where he asked about salary before he asked if I was okay. Every time he made me feel like the life I'd chosen was a detour from the life he'd already planned. Actions accumulate. They compound. And eventually, they arrive at a moment of truth where everything that was hidden becomes visible all at once, in front of 300 people, under a May sky in Georgia. My father is an intelligent man, but intelligence without integrity is just a sharper tool for getting what you want. He knew how to read a room, how to build an argument, how to make people feel small with language that was technically polite. What he never learned, what he is still, I think, in the process of not learning, is that real authority cannot be demanded. It has to be earned, quietly, over time, through the choices you make when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. Derek earned it that way. General Ashford earned it that way. I like to think I have been earning it that way. Deployment by deployment, decision by decision. Every morning I got up and did the thing that was required even when I didn't want to. That is not something you can buy or inherit. It is something you build in the dark, alone, and it shows up in your face and your hands by the time anyone thinks to look. What I carry from that day is not the slap. I barely remember the pain of it. What I carry is the silence that followed. 300 people on their feet, and my father sitting alone at a table he paid for, unable to lift his glass. That silence said everything that I had spent years trying to say in words. It said that the story he told about me was not the true one. It said that the people who mattered had already made up their minds. I think about the note General Ashford left in my bag. I have read it probably 40 times. The line I come back to is the one about legacies. That they are not inherited but built, not announced, but demonstrated. My father has his name on buildings. I have a daughter who watches how I carry myself, and a husband who chose me in uniform, and a record of decisions I made under pressure that no one can take off the wall. That is enough. More than enough. Whatever your father believes about you, whatever anyone believes about you, the work is the same. Show up with your whole self. Hold the line when it costs you something. Let the record speak. The truth has a way of standing up, even when you can't.